You gotta give me one thing. I'm a scary judge of talent.
Adolphus Washington back-to-back plays.
The Detroit Pistons select Luke Kennard from Duke University.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Triple Double podcast. We've got another episode for you. Now that we're into the high school season, well into the college season, bringing on some high-level guests. We've got one today, my good friend Brian Thornton, aka BT. Brian, what's up?
What's going on, man? I appreciate you having me on today. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Well, let me tell the folks listening, Brian Thornton, former longtime Division I assistant coach, spent the last 4 seasons on staff at Ball State. Before Ball State, was on staffs at Winthrop, Xavier, Furman, played collegiately at Xavier and Vanderbilt, as well as played overseas. And that's pretty much the story of your career, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, when you say it like that, it makes me feel old. A lot of stops along the way.
I mean, you're getting old, man.
It's all relative, but yeah, I'm starting to bald in the back. It's almost like I got a little sunroof going on. So I think that may be stress, that might be age, it could be my kids. I'm not exactly sure.
Well, everybody says that you got to stay active and everything. I know you're always on that golf course, so that's probably keeping you young.
Hey, you know what? When you have to hang up the basketball shoes, you got to find a different way to do it, something else to be competitive in and to compete against people and yourself. And I've found a love for golf that is something I can do hopefully for a long time.
Okay. Good deal. Let's talk today. I want to talk to you about coaching, obviously getting into coaching. You just made a decision to get out of coaching, do some other things. And one of the things I really want to talk about as we get into this conversation is coaching trees. And you come from a situation with Xavier and going on to Ball State and Winthrop before that with a kind of a coaching tree that really grew from some high-level coaches who are still doing big things. But, you finished your career at Xavier. You played overseas quickly, and then you pretty much got back to Xavier in a support staff role. So, what drew you after finishing your playing career into coaching?
Well, I never knew or planned on getting into coaching, if I'm being completely honest with you. As you said, I played at Xavier, and I had a nice career there, and I was fortunate to have the ability to go overseas and to play in Germany for a little while. It's certainly not necessarily what I would have expected or what I would have hoped for during my senior year, in which I had a very, very good year. But some injuries kind of derailed that next step in my ability to play professionally for a long time. So, there was a period of time where, I kind of needed to step away from basketball for a while because it kind of ended not on my terms. And I came back to Xavier, finished my MBA, and then actually worked corporately for Cintas for a year with no thoughts of really getting back into basketball in any kind of way. But taking that year away from it, it became the thing that I had done for virtually my entire life, certainly my entire adult life. And as I was away from it, I started to realize that basketball had given me a lot. It had given me a lot of opportunities to meet people, to see a lot of different places, to travel, to live in different cultures. And I was prepared to try to give back to the game that had given me so much. And being a coach would afford me that opportunity. And I was fortunate that it kind of coincided, kind of talking about what you were talking about in terms of coaching trees, that Sean Miller, Coach Miller, who had coached me at Xavier for his first two teams, was going to Arizona. Chris Mack was getting the Xavier job. He reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in coming back and joining him to be a part of his brand new staff. And it kind of went from there.
So what was your first gig being on the Xavier staff? What were you doing?
I was director of basketball operations for Coach Mack's first 2 years at Xavier. So in that role, it's a little bit of a coverall. It's kind of all things staff minus the recruiting and the on-the-court piece, because those things are legislated out where, you're not technically allowed to really coach the guys, and you're not allowed to go on the road recruiting. I was fortunate that there were some times where we had assistant coaches who were sick or whatever, and we were afforded the opportunity to allow me to do some recruiting on the road when those type of opportunities took place, and gave me a little experience. So I was thankful for that.
Okay. Well, then when you get into coaching, you end up in terms of an assistant role with Pat Kelsey at Winthrop. Pat's a Xavier guy. He's a Skip Prosser guy. But Pat's going to be connected to anyone who's ever been at Xavier because of how close he is to that university. And then after that, you go with James Whitford to Ball State. He's one of Sean Miller's guys, at Xavier at Arizona. So you really got put into kind of a young coach's tree. And, you played for Sean for 2 years, but that coaching tree has really grown. And then just talk about what coaching trees can be like in college basketball and how you kind of built up that relationship with Coach Kels, with Coach Whitford, and, even still today with Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a player at Xavier, when Coach Miller was the head coach, the assistant coaches at the time were Chris Mack, James Whitford, and Kenya Hunter, who's now an assistant at UConn. And, when you're around those guys every day, you build relationships with those guys. I can start to think about guys that I've coached and the relationships that I've built. When you're kind of going through it, you don't necessarily realize how deep those relationships can be, but you lean on those guys and you learn from them. And that's what happened with me and Coach Whitford. And we always kind of stayed in touch as we kind of went our separate ways after I graduated, and he moved on to Arizona with Coach Miller. But, this from time to time we would check in with each other just to see how things were going, and, always kind of kept that bond going. In terms of Pat Kelsey, when I came back to Xavier on Chris Mack's staff, he was the associate head coach. He had left Wake Forest to come back and join Coach Mack at Xavier. And Pat Kelsey is, as for guys who know him, is a ball of energy and a guy who works extremely, extremely hard and does a great job. But his task had always been a post-development coach. He had always coached the bigs, whether he was at Wake Forest or at Xavier. And, me being a former big guy, we kind of just naturally bonded in that way because of his love for the position.
You're like 1.5 feet taller than Pat Kelsey, aren't you?
I am. I'm 6'8", and Pat's probably 5'8", or maybe we'll give him 5'10". But that's one thing he always kind of joked about is that, as hard as he worked studying the position, and whether it be through film or just watching guys, that he really worked at understanding the nuances of post-development, that all that stuff came naturally to me. And he kind of afforded me the opportunity because he bounced a lot of questions off of me and thoughts. And, we were able to kind of talk through a lot of things that I experienced as a player and things that, little tricks of the trade and whatnot that we thought that we could pass on to the guys that we coached at Xavier.
Right, and we've talked a lot of Xavier basketball on this podcast, and we had Dante on. We talked about this a little bit, and everybody knows that I went to Cincinnati, and we would just beat you guys on Saturday, so we got the bragging rights for the year. But I really respect what Xavier's done, and when you look at what Sean Miller's built with a coaching tree, and then even if you want to take it up a level, if you want to add Thad Matta, where Sean has some experience with Thad, you've got Chris Mack, Travis Steele, now the head coach at Xavier. You got Whitford at Ball State. You got Pat Kelsey at Winthrop. You could also, if you're talking about that, include guys like Brad Stevens, Archie Miller, John Gross, Jeff Bulls. So between those guys, I look at it as it's so important for young coaches to get in with kind of these relationships and these families, because if you're just kind of walking around the Final Four as an ops guy or a GA or somebody that just graduated college trying to get in, and your resume is not going to get you in the door, but the relationships are. And that's something that's certainly prevalent at Xavier. And, Sean's really brought that to Arizona as well, with you starting to see some of his guys get jobs.
Absolutely. It's funny that you kind of talk about the old adage that, guys go to the Final Four with their resume in hand. They kind of walk around with hopes of getting a job. And it's kind of one of those weird things in college basketball that everybody talks about it, but no one can really come up with an example of a guy who did that and it actually worked out, if that makes sense. Myself included. I can remember at the time I was working at Cintas. I had decided that I was ready to get into basketball in some capacity, whether it meant, going back to school and being a GA or whatever. I just knew that I wanted to be a part of college basketball. And the Final Four was in Detroit that year. And I did what everybody does. I printed out a bunch of resumes. I printed out some cover letters. I made a packet. I had, 10 or 15 of these, envelopes stuffed with my information. And I went to the lobby of the Final Four at the convention and I started passing them out. And, I passed them out to guys that I knew or guys that would have a frame of reference of who I was, whether it be that they had recruited me or that they had coached against me when I was in college. Everybody from Carl Hobbs, who was the former coach at George Washington, to Brad Stevens, who was a butler at the time. And I was just putting my resume in people's hands in hopes that it would turn out to something. And the ironic thing is I did that, but then that night I happened to be hanging out and grabbed dinner with Chris Mack and a few other people. And then 4 days later, he becomes the head coach of Xavier. And because I was in Detroit at the time, had dinner with him, and had basically said that I was trying to get into college basketball, I was at the forefront of his mind. And, I get a call 4 days later, and he says he wants me to join his staff. That wouldn't have happened, one, if it wasn't for the connections that you're talking about. But two, I was in the right situation with a guy who was in the decision-making position. I got that job because of the relationships and the coaching tree, not because, I was holding my resume and passing them out to a million guys.
It's a long-term game. And I mean, that's one of the biggest things with networking at any level. And I mean, it's something that I deal with on the scouting service level and just, going to AAU tournaments and trying to make connections with college coaches to sell my scouting service, trying to make connections with AAU coaches, to kind of know who the best players are and to get a head start on evaluations and rankings and all that. And, the more hands you shake, it's a numbers game and eventually you're going to get some. But, the key is really, like you said, kind of cultivating the relationship. So even if you don't get a job, let's say Chris gets the Xavier job and he's already, promised the ops job to somebody, you at least are at the Final Four and you're with somebody established like Chris Mack, where you could say, it's not just Brian Thornton handing out a packet of resumes to somebody who doesn't know him. It's Brian Thornton handing out that packet, but somebody who is respected in the game like Chris Mack is kind of sitting there vouching for him. And that's going to give you a leg up on everybody else trying to get those same positions.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you made the point that it's a numbers game. You certainly have to put yourself out there and you have to meet new people, and introduce yourself and spend time talking to them. But, it's easy, just like in recruiting, it's easy to make that initial call or to make that initial connection or that handshake. But the key is in the follow-up. It's one thing to have that initial meeting, but after that meeting takes place, that follow-up of sending that guy a handwritten note or sending him an email or, just saying, hey, great, nice to meet you. Hey, next year, following up again, hey, can we grab coffee? Just those type of things. And I'm sure that from your standpoint, that's what it's all about as well. You meet a million coaches, you meet a million AAU coaches, but staying in contact with those guys throughout the year is what builds that relationship, not that initial meeting.
And then just being personable and, making a personal connection and, showing them that you can talk more than basketball. And then I think the other thing is you have to establish yourself as your own person within that circle. So, if you're, one of Sean Miller's guys, you played for Sean, and you don't want to walk in that room in terms of an interview and be a carbon copy of Sean. Sean's very intense guy, very basketball focused guy and everything. And you're much more of a laid back guy. And I mean, you look at something like with what Chris Mack did when he took over Xavier. Sean is very intense all the time and Chris is more of a jokey guy. Chris is very, cool with the media, likes to have people in practice and whatnot. So the biggest part of, I think, that networking is just adding your own personal touch, taking taking something that you learned from somebody and then making it your own. So, I mean, I've been introduced on the scouting level to plenty of people by somebody like a John Stovall or somebody like a Chaz Wolf, where, I've taken one or two things that I think that they do a great job of in terms of creating evaluations, but then I've got to have my own personal twist on it so that, my scouting service product is appealing and different from theirs. So somebody's not just hiring a coach that's going to be a cookie cutter of what they just had, or somebody's not taking a scouting service where it's just going to be repetitive information of what they've already read from someone else.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that your point is spot on. That's experiences are great, and getting to know people, and especially people who have been successful in whatever craft it is, whether it be coaching, whether it be, like you said, scouting, guys who do scouting services, guys who are established within their profession. Watching those guys, understanding what makes them work, learning from them is valuable. But like you said, the value is learning how you can use that information to make yourself better and to grow your own personal ability. And it was something Pat Kelsey always used to say, is that he has to be himself. For those of you guys who know Pat, he's extremely intense. It could be argued at times that he's almost wound a little tight. But you know what? Conversely, a guy like Chris Mack is a lot more laid back. Like you said, he's more easygoing. But Pat made the point that he can't be Chris Mack, because if he tries to be Chris Mack, he just becomes a bad version of somebody else, that he has to be himself. And, that's what people want ultimately, is for people to be genuine and to be themselves.
And when you talk about recruiting, I think it's super, super easy. I've talked about this on the podcast a lot. It's super easy to see if someone's being genuine or if someone's kind of being fake. And you really get it. I get it in terms of if college coaches call me regarding, a question about a kid or whatever, it's generally pretty easy to figure out if they've got an agenda or if they're really calling to check up on you. And, like you said, Pat Kelsey, if he's trying to be joking and jovial and whatnot, it's going to show. But if he's sitting there and, he's very to the point, very motivated, energetic, you're going to know, yeah, that's Pat being Pat. And, the kids who gravitate towards that are going to commit. And, the kids that would rather have that laid back thing, well, they wouldn't have been a good fit for him anyway.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I think that you're spot on when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of, not coaching tree, but in just terms of networking, in terms of connection, I think you come from another one, which is that, you came out of Louisville in terms of playing high school basketball. And I think there's, for being a smaller city, there's a lot of coaches that come out of Louisville. I mean, some of the guys I talk to all the time, obviously Chris Shoemate's one of my good friends at Northern Kentucky. J.R. Reynolds is not from exactly Louisville, but at Miami, Ohio now. You got Bo Braden and Doug Davenport, both at Bellarmine, both have been on Division I staffs. I'm sure I'm missing some people, but, the Louisville basketball community I've also found to be a place where, guys want to help each other kind of move up the ladder together.
Yeah, I think that's what Louisville is basketball. I've been in the state of Indiana for the last 5 years, and everybody talks about, Indiana being kind of a basketball state, but you know what, Kentucky is too. It's not, as big as, in Indiana or other, hotbed type places, but basketball is king. When you look at the fact that you have Kentucky and Louisville, who by all estimations are, two of the top, 5, 10 programs in the country, and they both come from a state like Kentucky, it goes to show how much people truly care about basketball in the state. And, that's what they bleed. There's no professional teams in the state. And so both Kentucky and Louisville are your de facto professional teams, and guys grow up in the state with a basketball in their hand and loving the game. And, I think that as young guys, whether it be myself or Doug Davenport, who's one of my best friends, Bo Braden, Chris Shoemate, a guy that I played against in high school, we all kind of grew up on it. And, when you reach a certain level and you go on and you play, that, it's a small enough place that the guys that are good players in the city, you all know each other. And so when you kind of move on, you guys stay in touch. And like you said, you try to help each other when you can through the process.
Absolutely. And then, using that, then you take it to the next level and you guys have to use those same tools. Again, when you look at these cities, any of these cities, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, even into West Virginia, even though you have kind of less players there. But when you look into Kentucky, you've got kind of closed basketball communities. So somebody like yourself, somebody like Shoemate or Doug Davenport, they're going to be able to get into those type of communities for recruiting. And what you did when you started to become an assistant, you're at Winthrop, you're at Furman, you're at Ball State, is you've got a pipeline kind of through Ohio and having played at Xavier. You've got one in Kentucky, having, being from there, it's a city where they're not going to forget great high school players. And then you've got kind of build one in Indiana. So, how did you kind of use that to continue to make connections in that kind of tri-state area and recruiting?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that wherever you go, you try to leave a footprint. Whether it be my time that I spent in Cincinnati as a player and as a staff member at Xavier, you build connections with high school coaches that come to practice. You get to know high school coaches, AAU coaches, because they come to games. Maybe one of your teammates or a guy or a player who's on the team, they come to practice. You spend time with them, and you start to build a little bit of a network and a relationship with those guys, with the understanding that when you move on to become a coach, that you can kind of call on those relationships. An example of a guy that I built a relationship with in Cincinnati was Carl Kramer over at Moeller. He was a guy that is as highly respected of a high school coach as there is in Ohio, maybe in the country. But he has guys coming in all the time. But I got to know him through Josh Duncan, who was one of my high school teammates, through the recruitment of several other guys while I was on staff. And then when I went down to Winthrop, I recruited Josh Davenport, who was one of his players, because it was an easy recruitment for him. I knew Carl, I knew the family well, and it made an easy recruitment for Josh to come down to Winthrop. In the state of Kentucky, there was a kid named Trey Moses, who I recruited at Ball State, who was a little known commodity. He was a guy who was very, very under recruited, didn't have many offers or anything like that going into his senior year AAU season, but there was a group of guys in Louisville who knew me and I trusted, that said, hey, this is a kid that you really need to take a good look at, because I think he has an opportunity to be really good. And 4 years later, he's a two-time all-conference player and all-defensive team member at Ball State, and he's in the middle of his senior year on a team that has a chance to be one of the best teams in the MAC.
Right. Well, that makes sense, and that's exactly it. And then, even going back to, in terms of building relationships in Cincinnati, when you look at what you were doing at Xavier in ops, one of your jobs, I'm sure, was helping with team camp. And like Cincinnati, like Ohio State, Xavier runs a really good team camp. They're going to have most of the great Cincinnati high school programs come through. And then you, in terms of ops, have to run that camp. But then at the same time, you've got to use that opportunity to cultivate relationships with high school and, maybe AAU coaches that are sitting there watching, but particularly high school coaches, for when down the line at whatever school you're at, you're going to have a chance to recruit their kids.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that, but even the fact that I'm on this podcast is because of my time at Xavier. Our opportunity to get to know each other was based on the fact that I played at Xavier, and we knew some of the same people and we got to know each other. But other guys I got to know, O.Z. Davis in Cincinnati. It's funny, Brian Snow, who's become more of a national guy at this point, was at my wedding. He's one of my good friends. And it's because at the time that I played at Xavier, he was, the beat writer for Rivals at Xavier at the time. So, you get to know these people who, you're kind of coming up through the ranks together. At the time, Brian Snow was not a big deal, and neither was I. Not that I'm a big deal now, but...
Not that he's a big deal now.
Not that he's a big deal now either, but he certainly is in a position of note at this point. And, our relationship is easy now because we've known each other for so long, and, I trust him and he trusts me.
Right. And that's one of the things is, we talked about getting into those circles and, trying to break into those circles. And as much as it's hard to get in, it's even harder to get out. I mean, there's going to be a lot of loyalty, and that's, one of the fun things about basketball. When you look at, like what I do right now for a living, I mean, I have my company, but I don't consider it to be a real 9-to-5 job because it's kind of a 24/7, but I've also got a lot of freedom to do other things like basketball. But that's kind of one of the basketball world things, is that loyalty kind of makes it feel like not a job, but just kind of a family, and this is what you do. Basketball is what you do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the profession it's a hard profession, whether you're in scouting services or whether you're a coach. It's very time consuming. It takes a lot of time. You travel a ton. And, in a lot of respects, the guys that you have relationships with, whether they're long-standing relationships that you've built over time or new relationships that you build with somebody because you have stuff in common, those people become like family. When you're a college basketball coach, you spend so much time with the guys on your staff that when the situation connects, you become fast friends. Some of my best friends in the world are guys that I didn't know before we started working together. And then whether, you move on to other places or whatever, those relationships stay intact. And, you help each other. And it's not just about, did you help me get this player? Or can you help me with this scouting report? It's, you might go on vacation with that person, or, you're asking about things that are going on in their lives with their families. And I think that's just one of the things that keeps people going in this profession, is that there's a lot of good people in it. And building those relationships is one of the most valuable things out there.
Well, just like with players, players obviously, have lifetime friendships. And, one of the great things that I see with Xavier and Cincinnati, former players, guys in their, good Lord, late 40s. I see there's a number of Xavier guys that are involved in high school coaching in Cincinnati or have kids that are high school players, and you still see the camaraderie. But, even past your playing days, that's what you see with, the guys that you came up with. So, Xavier's got a large support staff, and it could be somebody who was in sports medicine, somebody who was in strength training, someone who was in video coordinator role, a GA, another ops person, whatever. But as much as, you have those positive memories of, family with those guys, you also have positive memories of sacrifice. And I was at the Crosstown Shootout this weekend, and one of the guys I was with is he coaches some AAU younger guys. He's just starting to really get into coaching, and he asked me, he said, well, how do you become a college coach? And the first thing I said to him is, you sacrifice for probably up to 10 years, and you're probably not going to make a lot of money for 10 years. And if you do a hell of a good job, then you're going to have an opportunity. And that's the first step. So, having come up in the scouting world, the guys who I really have the close friendships are the guys who I was there with when they were nothing. And, that makes you closer friends, when you do start to build a brand, whether it's for yourself as a coach or in a scouting role or, whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, like you said, it takes a lot of hard work. And, it's part of it is about timing as well. You have to be in the right place at the right time with the right person. But you also have to show an ability to work hard. And like you said, you have to show an ability to, at times, do things for next to no money at times. And it's like you said, if you're willing to do that, eventually you'll get a crack. Sometimes you just have to keep knocking on that wall until it becomes a door.
Right. I mean, one thing I say, as I get older, as I have my company outside of basketball, is I've said for a long time that I'm not going to do anything in basketball that I don't personally enjoy anymore. And I think when I was doing basketball full time, especially when I was younger, one of the best parts about it was, as much as there is sacrifice in it and some of the things, like for me, it was like, all the data input, all the invoicing I had to do for scouting. But when it comes to any of the basketball part, I never really considered any of that work. I mean, it's a job, but it's also fun. And I think that's one of the approaches you got to have. And, anytime we have one of these podcasts, people talk about, having to love basketball as a player to be successful. But, it's even more so a love for basketball is necessary if you're going to be a video coordinator or an ops guy, because outside of basketball, you've got to do so many things that go with it that are some of the most tedious things while keeping your schedule of basketball stuff where it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. And, I think there's a little bit of a misnomer when it comes to the way college basketball works. Everybody knows about the top-end guys, the head coaches that are making millions of dollars a year and that kind of becomes what everybody talks about or thinks that that's the norm, when in reality, it's not. Most people aren't making that kind of money. And the crazy thing about it is, there's assistant coaches who are making $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year. And there's also assistant coaches that are making, $20,000 a year. And the crazy thing is they're doing the same job. They're doing relatively the same job. They're recruiting, they're building relationships, they're scouting, they're coaching, they're developing young men. They're doing the same thing. It's just on a different scale. And, you have to love the game in order to do it, regardless of almost what the money is, with the hope that you can make enough to make a living.
There's something to be said for even doing it on the lower level. And I mean, on the higher level, obviously that's where the glory is. That's where the big money is. And, you're going to get, the ESPN and all that goes with that. But, one thing I noticed when I first got into scouting, having come from being a manager at Cincinnati, and that's what I knew. And, we were in the Big East at the time. We played against some programs. We had good resources. We played against some programs that had unreal resources. And that's what I thought college ball was. And then I get out there in the scouting world and I see, just the difference between something like the MAC or the Horizon or the Southern Conference, some of the differences there. But while it isn't as glorifying of an experience, it's often a pure experience in that you have to deal with less media. You have to deal with less fan pressure, and you can really just be around and coach your guys. And there's something great about that. And I remember my freshman year at Cincinnati as a manager, I was with Shoemate, and we were walking into the first day of our team camp. And if you know University of Cincinnati, when you use the rec center and what used to be Shoemaker Center, you could use like 13 courts. So there's a ton of teams there. There's like 70 teams. And I remember all of our coaches were sitting there waiting to do a meeting, and Shoemate said, look at these high school coaches. They all want to be us and we all want to be them, because, that's one of the things about it. As you get higher into it, there's pressure. And, sometimes I think the high school guys have the best job.
Shoemate wanted to be them, but with his paycheck.
Right. Well, Shoemate was a first-year operations guy at that point. I think he was sleeping in the office. But there's a lot more glory. And sometimes if you want to look at it from just a pure I want to coach basketball standpoint, high school or Division II colleges seems like sometimes the way to go.
Yeah, no, I mean, your point is certainly well made. I was fortunate that in my 10 years of being a part of college basketball, I kind of had the fortune of being a part of staffs at almost every level. Obviously Xavier it might not be a Kentucky or a Louisville, but it's a high major for all intents and purposes. We chartered flights and, the whole 9 yards, playing in big games, going on big trips.
You don't have football, so it's the main sport too.
It's the main sport. And, when you play in Cintas Center and it's sold out with over 10,000 people every game, and, you're getting all the Nike gear in the world, like it's certainly a high major operation over there. And then I went from there to coach at Furman and at Winthrop, which are two, lower major schools, and experiencing the difference of going from a situation where you maybe are eating at, Benihana's or Ruth's Chris or, wherever when you're at Xavier to, your post-game meal might be a box of pizza when you're at a place like Furman. And that's a different experience that I think that has a lot of value. Like you said, you have to want to do it. You have to love the game to be in that type of environment. And then going on to Ball State, it's kind of in the middle. We chartered some flights, but you know what? We took a lot of bus trips as well. And, kind of having that experience, I think, gives me a well-rounded understanding and approach for understanding the game of college basketball and what coaching is really like. And, I would certainly say that, any guy who's getting into the business, and everybody has the aspirations and the desire to be at that high level, because like you said, that's where the glory is at. That's where the TV attention's at. That's where the coverage is at. That's where the money is at. I think that everybody should spend some time at lower levels just so they can kind of experience it. Because I think that when you're at a Furman, a Winthrop, a Morehead State, when you're at those places, you really learn if you love coaching and you're doing it for the love of coaching, or are you really doing it because you love what comes along with coaching? You love, walking into a place and, wearing an X on your shirt or having a UK symbol and people saying, oh, you work at UK or whatever. You have to really have a desire to do what you're there to do, which is to help young men develop and to win games.
And I'm a huge, in a similar point, I'm a huge believer that is a beneficial situation for players as well. And now while you can't get that based on, your college and or your high school decision, you can get it on the circuit. And I think it's great when I look at kids who have spent their entire AAU career on a shoe circuit team and, things are usually pretty easy in terms of travel and the budget's good versus kids who started off with a zero budget AAU team and then eventually got to that shoe circuit team is, those kids I think have a huge advantage. And if they've seen the other side, they've seen, how much of a sacrifice it is for their parents or guardians to get into that tournament, how much you have to love basketball in terms of, driving further away from the venue to staying in a lesser hotel, getting 6 kids in a room, eating McDonald's and everything. I think that really benefits those kids, whereas sometimes, if all you know is the upper tier of the circuit, from a player's perspective, it can take away from your sense of reality.
Absolutely. I think that experience goes both ways. Just like I talked about that experience from a college coaching standpoint, I certainly think it's from a player standpoint too. When you play it at an elite high major place, all you know is charter flights, being catered to, all those things. But, when you're playing at a lower level or lower resource location, you have to do it for the love of the game. It's easy to get excited when you walk into an arena and it's sold out and there's 20,000 people in there and, everybody's going crazy and it's loud and the sound works and all that stuff. But you know what? When you roll into a Division I game and there's, 450 people in the stands, you have to make your own energy. You have to create your own energy, and you have to play the game hard because you have it in your own purview, your own desire to play well and to play hard. You have to do it from that standpoint, and that's not easy to do. And the guys who are capable of doing that, I have a lot of respect for.
No doubt. Well, for all the good things that you said about coaching, you just recently decided to get out of it. So, how hard was it for you to get out of coaching? And, what do you miss about it only being a couple months out?
I coached for 10 years and I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it. The reason that I got into it was because of the relationships, building relationships with, obviously other coaches and whatnot, but really it was players. It was trying to help young men grow and young men develop. And, I felt like guys like Chris Mack and James Whitford, they took me under their wing when I was a player and they helped me grow in a lot of ways. And I wanted to give that same thing back to other guys that I had the good fortune of coaching. But you know what? As time went on, I got to a point where as much as I loved those things, I was ready for a little bit of a change. I have 2 young kids and I wanted to be in a little bit of a situation where I had a little bit more control of my time, of my location. That's one thing about college coaching that you can win or you can lose, but that doesn't mean you can always control your location. And I wanted to have a little bit more control of where our family was at and that kind of thing. And that's why I kind of made the decision to step away from it. And, so far it's been great. I've been able to spend a lot more time with my family and that kind of thing, which is good, and especially with my 2 little ones. But it's certainly different flipping on a game at night and, watching it for just the enjoyment of the game and not because I'm scouting or preparing for our next one.
And there's always ways to stay involved in basketball, even if it's not coaching to that degree, even if it's just, working with your kids on the basketball court as they get older, I'm sure you'll do some of that and all that. But, it works for some people. It's a very difficult thing in terms of coaching in college basketball and spending time with your kids. And so for some people, it's the right situation, but it's very difficult and it's a tough balancing act, I'm sure.
It is a tough balancing act. I heard Chris Mack say that it's not about balancing your personal life and your coaching life. You have to find a way to blend it together. Allow your kids to be a part of what you're doing. And if you're fortunate to have a a boss, a head coach who allows you to do that, you're in great shape. I was in a really, really good situation with Coach Whitford up at Ball State. And, I miss those guys tremendously because we all had such a great working relationship. But, it is hard. You do spend a lot of time away from your family and whatnot. But most jobs have some component of that. There's very few jobs that you're going to get great enjoyment out of where the only thing you do is come in at 9 o'clock and you leave at 5 o'clock and you have nothing else to do with it. Most people are unfortunate to have a situation like that and still be able to make enough money to finance their family's lives. So I'll certainly miss coaching. And like you said, there'll certainly be things that I do to stay involved with it, whether it be going to games, talking to former players, eventually maybe coaching my kids. Time will tell how I stay involved, but I'll for sure stay in touch with you, and that'll help me.
Well, right. But here's the thing. Your kids are on a set timer. They're gonna grow up at a set rate. Basketball, for the most part, we hope, isn't going anywhere. And if you eventually want to get back in, you can get back in, and you probably only miss a small step along the lines. Whereas if you miss stuff with your kids growing up, there's no replay for that.
Oh, there's no question about it. And that certainly played a part in my decision. I don't know that I'll get back into college coaching. Time will tell, but I know that I'll stay involved in basketball, and that's for sure. And when my daughter was preparing to be born, we had just moved to Muncie when I took the job at Ball State, and we were preparing to play at Utah. It was our second game of the season in 2014. Obviously, at the time, Utah was a top 25 team. It's a big game for us. I had just got there. I was a new assistant coach on staff. My wife was extremely pregnant, and, I kind of felt a little bit of angst going to Utah with my wife being so close to her due date. And before I could even address it with Coach Whitford, he just said, "Hey, you're not going on the trip to Utah because at the end of the day, I don't want you to miss something here at home." And he said, in a week and a half, I'm not going to remember if you were at the Utah game or not, but you guys will always remember if you missed the birth of your child. So to your point, there's certain things that you don't want to miss when it comes to family. And, I give Coach Whitford a lot of credit for making family a really, really big part of our program at that.
Well, that's a perfect perspective point to end on. And, that was basically the whole theme today, really. And I think you tied it together nicely. So good stuff over here. Well, BT, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy in your other ventures now. You're busy with your kids, and appreciate you coming on here.
Absolutely, Corey. I appreciate you having me, and look forward to seeing you on the road soon, my man.
Good deal. Well, guys, let's wrap this one up. That was Brian Thornton, former Division I assistant on a number of places, and got some great feedback today on coaching trees, on getting into coaching, getting out of coaching, and some of those kind of life decisions. Some bigger picture stuff today. But that was the Triple Double podcast for December 11th, 2018. Thanks, guys. This podcast is brought to you by PlayEasy.com. For players, coaches, or casual athletes looking to book a sports facility, as well as owners and managers of sports facilities, PlayEasy.com is the new one-stop site for streamlined services. If you're looking for a place to practice, play, host your tournament, camp, or other, simply go to PlayEasy.com and create a booking request for your area. Your request will go out to surrounding facilities who will respond with their best offer. Once you receive the offer that best fits your needs, book the facility and you're ready to play. For facility owners and managers, PlayEasy puts the power in your hands to maximize the usage and visibility of your facility. Register your facility for free today at PlayEasy.com. PlayEasy.com is the booking site built by athletes, coaches, and facility managers, and is proud to help bring you the Triple Double podcast. This podcast is also brought to you by Anago Cleaning Systems. Are you tired of struggling in a dead-end job? If so, Anago Cleaning Systems has what you're looking for, an opportunity to go into business for yourself, but not by yourself. With franchising opportunities available for as little as a $2,500 down payment, Purchasing an Anago franchise has never been easier. Once you own your Anago franchise, you're licensed to clean commercial facilities all around the greater Cincinnati, Dayton, or Columbus areas with the support of Anago's sales, quality control, operational, and accounting staff. Call 513-332-0033 today for your opportunity to be your own boss and grow your own commercial cleaning company under the guidance of Anago's proven and successful system. Again, call 513-332-0033 to learn more. With Anago, your future starts today.